Okay, welcome back. Late March, 1859 then. So the first the spring report for this year. And what will be the last year of the decade? And we'll kick off with a scripted event, actually. And scripted events are reasonably kind of rare in this game. They crop up from time to time. Sometimes they're sort of flavor events, where they all have some kind of impact. So the Crimean War, which of course has been over for some years, caused a massive emigration of Tatars and the Crimea, a Muslim Turkic ethnic group residing in the Crimean Peninsula, from a total population of about 300, or total Tatar population of 300,000. About 200,000 moved to the Ottoman Empire. The exodus of a large portion of Muslim peoples from southern Russia greatly influences Turkey's fundamental features, but caused some local civil disorder. So that's interesting, and it looks like from that we get a small prestige boost. Not quite sure why, but 25 prestige buff, I guess because we're a kind of focal point where we consider the place where Muslims can kind of safely move to. I suppose that does have some ramifications in terms of how we're viewed, but that's interesting. And I can only see this having fairly positive consequences for the most part. We're already seeing a significant demographic expansion really of central and western Anatolia, which seems to be our kind of census, seems to sort of reflect that population growth is principally focused in central and western Anatolia, which is really, really good. And this is the area also of the kind of focus for our industrial development. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on what other ramifications that might have with regard to, for example, civil disorder. But anyway, no problems to speak of yet, but then it has just sort of happened. Economically, things are good. I think I mentioned last turn then we've got the bridging line being developed over at Erzurum. You can't see all of the rail lines again. I don't know if it's because of a bug or because of some kind of terrain feature. If you're ever playing the game and you want to know where you have railroads, and really you've got to see the kind of lines on a map more as just cosmetic sort of fluff as opposed to any necessarily reliable information, but you can just always go to supply filter the areas here. You can see the areas now that have integrated railroad access quite clearly. So we can see that these areas are all linked up now with railroad, and that's fairly significant development, really, considering that we've only really had access to railroad development for 4 or 5 years. So we're definitely kind of embracing this new technology as a new bridge and looking to kind of make up lost ground, especially when we look at how developed railroads are with regard to our competitors. Even Austria, an Austria which has been sustained some serious damage in the last war, is still developing railroads, and down towards Banat. We're also seeing some agricultural enterprises re-spring up in Hungary. I think it'll be a long time for them ever to be kind of in a position where they were, 5 years ago. I don't think they're going to be there for some time. They're doing quite well in northern Italy. Some evidence of kind of very minor seesawing, but for the most part, Austria looks like it has Italy under wraps, and it really looks like Piedmont, Sardinia have kind of mucked up there. They should have really embraced the win that they had. They had Milan, maybe tried to use an opportunity for when Austria was tied up elsewhere in some other conflict to kind of consolidate their position in Italy. It may have been that they're thrown away. I mean, both in terms of Italian unification and Prussian unification, they both may still happen, but there's some evidence to suggest they might not now. Prussia also kind of got a bit excited a bit early on. They've made peace with Belgium now, but they got heavily involved with the Low Countries, ahistorically, antagonized the French, and then eventually went to war with France, quite a bit before they were in a position where they could deal with France. Bear in mind in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, it wasn't just Prussia. Prussia was relying also on the kind of German Confederation. It was utilizing access to a number of kind of armies and forces of various kind of German principalities, and that's not the case here, and it looks like they're really paying the price. French forces are now deep in Dortmund, deep in kind of Western Germany, and what ramifications this has for German unification remains to be seen. But it could be an interesting era if both Italy and Germany don't unite, and you have a kind of Natanix kind of Europe in a kind of stasis. Then don't know what ramifications that has for us. Not necessarily terrible. Probably we would prefer German and Italian unification. But also kind of German patronage, a united Germany that's offering support to Austria would not necessarily be terribly desirable. And certainly for a fairly long period of time, the three emperors kind of alliance between Austria, Prussia, and Russia, also not very desirable for us, and that was something that did exist in the latter part of the 19th century, really before kind of Russia flipped to move over to the sort of side of the French Republic and the Entente. But yeah, so good and bad. Maybe unification of Germany isn't desirable. I don't know. Remains to be seen. But yeah, these are really the developments in the international stage. The other thing, of course, is the ongoing conflicts in Scandinavia. This is becoming a long, protracted war now, and it's one where Russia really has the upper hand. I think the longer they hold this position, the more severe terms they can dictate on Sweden. I don't think Russia has any legitimately recognised claims on Sweden, so that what claims they can press will be sort of economic, I suppose, maybe forcing them to disarm. I don't know, maybe forcing them to make Norway independent or something like this. But yeah, interesting. And I mean, that keeps Russia tied up in the north, although there are occasionally signs that Russians have substantial forces, none at the moment. Substantial forces do make an appearance on their southern borders, which suggests that they certainly don't have all their forces committed to Sweden. And I think now, once they've broken this difficulty of kind of the northern part of Scandinavia, which is not conducive to large forces invading, once they've broken this problem, probably for amphibious landings, which we've seen in the war that we had with Russia, that they are quite adept at, then that's obviously kind of offset any problems that Russia might have in northern Scandinavia in terms of maintaining large forces in Scandinavia. Then they can now have presumably good maritime access to Stockholm and can supply considerable forces in southern Scandinavia. We'll keep an eye on that situation though, and Russia, Austria do really remain for the most part our principal foes. I think the weakness of Austria, maybe I'd overestimated. I'm not sure. They're doing well in northern Italy, which they didn't do at the end of the. When they finished fighting us, they still had another 6 months fighting with Italy, and they really struggled. So yeah, I don't know. They seem to have militarily recovered anyway. They must have enough tax revenue, at least in the short term, to support fairly substantial ground forces. I don't know long term whether that's going to be the case. And as I mentioned in the last video, what the basis for that is: increased tax, increased taxes. Well, increased taxes is going to put pressures on things like revolt risk, which is already a problem the Austrian Empire has because of the fact that it's kind of a multi-ethnic empire with lots of different kind of interests pulling in different directions. So we'll keep an eye on that situation, see what happens there. But yeah, economically, I talked about kind of development, railroads and such. Beyond that, imports and exports, imports are fairly set now. 82 units, 27 units of merchandise for 82 spent. But we're looking at, this is really, really good. Exports 85 for 259. And domestic consumption fairly stable at 107 for 361. But yeah, the economy's looking in really good shape. We're seeing really, really consistent kind of exports of lots of high-end stuff, manufactured goods, ammunition, military supplies, a lot of dyes. Austria is one of our biggest customers for exports of all different kinds of commodities, which is good to see. But also kind of more traditional trading partners, Britain, Belgium, and France. And also Russia, despite the fact that we're kind of, they're a sort of peer adversary, if you like. Russia's still a substantial trading partner. And the first signs of something interesting, Chile, a Latin American republic, importing from us, and that is welcome to see. That's really good to see. And they're the kind of markets we want to look at cracking, really. I think long term is going to be kind of Latin America, China. To that end, I did actually send diplomats to China with a view to kind of improve relations with the Chinese. Relations have improved, but it's fairly anemic stuff. It's not what we would, not to the extent that we would have liked to have seen. We've sent an additional, we still have a kind of state visit ongoing. We sent an additional offer for a commerce agreement. So far, nothing has come of that. But yeah, we'll keep pushing for that, I think, because China would be a really good market, even in its chaotic state. If it can be a place where we can export manufactured goods through luxury goods, machine parts, steel, all these kinds of things that are going to become, more and more part of our economy. We're already a big exporter of manufactured goods. Then China is definitely a market for us, because China is going to be a country that's, it's going to be dependent on imports of these kinds of things. It's going to be a big agricultural economy, but can you imagine the size of the market, what its domestic consumption is. It's going to be huge, and yeah, it'll be dependent on imports. And obviously countries like Britain are going to be interested in kind of capturing that market for themselves. But there's no reason why we can't have a piece of that pie, to tell you the truth. So we're going to be looking to do that. That's a long-term plan, really. But yeah, economically things are looking decent, and there's been different times where exports have tapered off, and I've got a bit anxious about it. But it's been relatively short-lived. That's a part of the world market. There's always going to be, within certain kinds of commodities, little booms and busts and this kind of thing. But actually, I'd say for the most part, exports are looking really solid, and it's good to see. In terms of our colonial kind of plans, things are going ahead as a snail's pace, really. Our position in the kind of Persian Gulf, we're looking to kind of, as mentioned, really looking to increase colonial penetration. It's quite difficult because we've got all the structures in place now. It's just a case of using colonial merchants and other kinds of bribing local tribal chiefs. They've not had huge results, and British attempts to kind of get a little bit involved, for example, in Qatar, has resulted in some atrophying, very small atrophying of our colonial penetration. But it's an atrophying of our position that is enough that it means that we don't quite get over the threshold required for formal colonisation, which is a shame. Less of a problem in Dubai. The British aren't really present there, but we're still not at the 50% kind of threshold required for formal colonial, for turning it into a formal colony. Kuwait, same kind of position, really. It's still a protectorate. The British are at 28%, we're at 43%. The British can't block transition from protectorate to colony. A protectorate means it's already a halfway house, it's already in the bag, it's already really formally recognised as an Ottoman interest now. And the only way the British can block this is by meddling and looking to kind of atrophy our colonial penetration, undermining our position, which makes it harder and harder for us to reach the 50% threshold required for formal colonisation. And it looks like they're doing that. But it's a kind of half-hearted effort, but it's enough, that it's an irritant. We'll keep an eye on that situation. I mean, these are protectorates, so the British, they've got a weak hand now, really. They can't lay a stake. So we should keep that in mind. They can't lay a stake. Now, that is something that we're going to be in a position where we will be able to do ourselves. So, for example, the Dutch are now moving for formal colony status in, what is the territory? This territory is colonial area, Sumbawa. So that's this kind of region here. This was a protectorate. The Dutch are moving to formal colonial status. They would have obviously had the required penetration, which is 60% of the colonial capital and averaging at 40% in the outlying kind of provinces. Now there's a good chance their next move will be to try and push Sumatra into protectorate status. Even with their colonial position atrophied, they're still in a position to do that, actually. And if that happens, we will be in a position to stake a claim. That could cause a diplomatic crisis between us, and we're comfortable with that. We'll have to try and play our cards right if that happens. And I think we'll be aggressive because, I don't know, who's going to come to the defence of Holland? Holland's been at war with Prussia, and no one's lifted a damn finger. So I don't get the impression that they've got any kind of big patronage. Let's have a look. Yeah, so no one's guaranteeing, excuse me. No one's guaranteeing their position at all. So yeah, we're kind of well placed to sort of. We'd be hard pressed to conduct a serious military expedition against the Dutch in Southeast Asia, frankly. But I think the Dutch would recoil from that. We'll keep an eye on the situation anyway. If we can kind of bring their colonial penetration down enough, at least in Palembang. If we can bring that below 50%, I think it has to be above 50 even for protectorate status. Let's double check that. No, it's the colonial region, colonial area. So protectorate is 30 to 100. Yeah, so we wouldn't be in a bit. They would be able to. They would be in a position to try and move for protectorate status. We would look to block that consistently. It does mean that the next time we have diplomats, because in order to lay a stake to challenge their claim will always require state funds, a small amount, 75, but always diplomats. If we're caught with our pants down without any kind of diplomatic clout because it's been spent on things like trying to curry favour with the Chinese, we could really be in a tricky situation. So we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure we've always got two diplomats, because a stake doesn't always work. It's a kind of possible thing. It may just be ignored by everyone, and it means that But for them to transition Sumatra to colonial status does require a bit of time. That gives us time to play with. It means that we might have to lay a couple of stakes. So the first one might just come off without any result, or it might just result in removing their kind of attempt to transition Sumatra to protectorate. It just removes their kind of colonial position. They don't do it. The other thing, of course, is it leads to a crisis. Now, talking of crisis, something really interesting had happened. It happened last term. It wasn't so significant that I felt the need to depict it, but there was a kind of a political crisis, and it was between Britain and the United States, and it was over Hawaii, and that in itself is unremarkable. I didn't realise the British had any claim. I'm always really sensitive about scrolling the map around the Pacific. It seems to always be the Pacific that if you scroll really quickly, the game crashes. I suspect it's because of this. It's because of kind of where the world ends and begins. It's like flat Earth kind of game scripting. But yeah, if you transition really quickly, the game crashes. Always in the Pacific, heads up. Anyway, so if you try and move the map really quickly, that is. The British had fairly significant colonial penetration in Hawaii. Perhaps in real life this was kind of a thing that the British were toying with, and it's just something that the AI has gone with a bit harder. Especially since the British position, for example, in the Persian Gulf, is far weaker than it was in real life. The British had a really strong position in the Persian Gulf. The fact that that's moved over to protectorate status maybe has freed up resources which they would have spent, and they've pursued other goals. This has resulted in a kind of an ahistorical, butterfly effect crisis with the Americans over Hawaii, and I thought, well, hands down, Britain's going to win that. It's the great power of the era. The United States at this time, its power is, it emerges into a great colossus eventually, but it's still very embryonic as a great power, much more of a regional entity. Anyway, the diplomatic crisis played out in a really interesting way. It ended with the Americans playing hardball. They actually mobilised, spooked the British. The British obviously didn't fancy a fight on the Canadian border, and the Americans won. And they won big. So they get all of the colonial penetration. It lifts their penetration up to 59%. They're now in a position to move that to, what is it? It's an American influenced territory. That can be moved from protectorate right to colony status now. And the Americans gained an immense amount of prestige from this conflict. Like, it was a big embarrassment for the British. They got about 3,000 prestige for it. Bear in mind that we're the 5th greatest power on Earth, and our total prestige is 6,800. The Americans get 3,000 from this showdown with the British, and the Americans mobilised at the end. You can see the last evidence of this is the Americans then cancel mobilisation. The card that they play, the last card, incidentally does stipulate that you mobilise. Now, mobilisation isn't something that exists for us. I don't know if it is ever going to, but I think it reflects the kind of levy en masse that is a tradition of the kind of Western European armies. Whereas the Ottoman army is a little bit like a kind of standing professional army, or the army of a kind of, fiefdom or that kind of thing. It's not really a medieval army, but it's like an early modern army, but it's a standing early modern army, In some senses, it's more similar to a modern army of today. It's a modern professional army, but it's Europeans, powers, if they mobilise, are able to bring reserve divisions, lots of reserve divisions to bear. That was something that I thought the Austrians were going to do, by the way. They didn't. It may mean they don't have the technology. I think it's a technology, maybe we'll have access to it at some point. I honestly don't remember. Maybe at some point we'll have access to a kind of technology which reflects an administrative instrument, if you like, that allows you to draw on your kind of fighting age male population, that you can suddenly, in a moment of warfare, significantly expand your army around the kind of cadre army that you have currently standing around the professional army that we have. Anyway, the Americans mobilised, and the British backed down. They get 3,000 prestige. So if we look at the rankings of the great powers now, we're ranked 5th. So the first great power in ranking is Britain at 15,721. The second great power is France at 10,854. The third great power, just behind France, ahistorically, is the United States of America in terms of its prestige as standing among great powers because of the kind of huge lift. So it was presumably about 7,000 before this crisis, which means that it wasn't far ahead of us. We were probably looking to eclipse the United States in terms of prestige. Prestige, by the way, in this game is a very dynamic thing. It's not something that's dependent on one thing. Obviously, battles increase your prestige, favourable outcomes in terms of warfare, randomized scripted events can influence your prestige a little bit, but also things like economic growth. Every time you build a factory, you get prestige from that. Every time you build an RGO, lay a railroad. So the fact that we've economically developed in a much more robust way than the Ottoman Empire did in real life reflects itself in our prestige. And the fact that the wars that we've had, excuse me, have had favourable outcomes. All these kind of things combine to give us a real boost. I mean, I think we started this period in 1850, I think we ranked 7th. So we're the kind of end of the list, really, in truth, of the great powers. We're now 5th, so we're very much in the game. And if you look at Austria, we've kind of switched with Austria already. Austria is 7th with 4,819 prestige. Russia is above us. They're ranked 4th at 9,261. So a little bit further off than us. And Russia will get a lot of prestige because of its size, because of its various colonial interests in Siberia. It is a kind of big empire that's backward, but acquires a lot of prestige just based on its scale. It's going to get a lot of prestige from its involvement in Central Asia and stuff like that, the Far East. But we'll keep an eye on how that score kind of tallies. We will keep an eye on the prestige. The other thing, of course, also just national objectives. National objectives, because it gives you consistent prestige. These are the places that the ruling class deem as being absolutely essential. They see this, they see themselves. They see the empire as having prestige staked in these locations, and it's a variable amount. Constantinople, of course. If we lose Constantinople, it's really game over for us. But other areas like Smyrna, Baghdad, Kars, Adrianople, these are the first-rate places. These are seen as like the major cities of the Ottoman Empire, the major kind of centres. And then you've got secondary ones, Basra. Looking at this, it increasingly makes me think that we have to sort of do... Medina, by the way, is controlled by us, but the region around it is controlled by rebels, so for that reason it has a cross, but the city is actually controlled by us. Although it doesn't have anything in brackets, so I think we actually have to control the region. Once we consolidate Hejaz, Medina will be dealt with, basically. But yeah, Medina is the other place that's considered a prestige location, not controlled by us. But looking at this, it makes me think that, yeah, we really have to make sure that we hold our position in the European theatre, really, the Balkan Peninsula, especially when we look at Salonika and Sofia, 8 prestige points per turn from objectives. So I believe it's per turn, I'm not sure how it works out, but holding these is going to be really important, I think, long term for us. So yeah, we would look to maintain our position in Europe as best we can. So anyway, yeah, in terms of the kind of rankings, the United States has really gone up. We'll see if that holds. It's 1859 after all, and there are there are rumours coming out of the North American continent that there's a lot of squabbles going on, especially with their southern states, secession noises and slavery and all this kind of nonsense. Maybe that has ramifications on their prestige and their standing among great powers. I don't know, but we'll see what unfolds. Maybe Britain goes to war with the United States. I don't think Britain. I'd be surprised if Britain stands for that. I wonder if Britain gets a casus belli on the United States from that. Let's have a scroll down. It's interesting they have a casus belli against Austria. That must mean that the British are guaranteed Piedmont Sardinia. They're doing nothing about it, though. No, Orange Free State, Greece, Dominican Republic, Piedmont has a casus belli on them because of their control of, I don't know what, I guess Corfu. No, so no casus belli. They've actually, for the most part, got quite good relations with the Americans, I think. Let's have a look at what their relations are with the United States. But it would have taken a hit based on this crisis. No, they do have poor relations with America. I think they had quite good relations at one point, but yeah, their relations are taking a hit with the Americans. So, be interesting to see if they come to blows and how that pans out. Because America is a regional imperialist entity, but it's it's growing into a big, it's a transcontinental power, really, even by now, even if most of its interior and western areas is for the most part undeveloped. They have a large border with the British, with the kind of British North America and Canada. So, yeah, we'll see what happens anyway. We'll keep an eye on that. Be interesting to see. Probably we would... the Ottoman Empire's position, obviously, as any war between any European power or Europeanized power is balanced positive for us, as far as we're concerned. Good. They can hack each other to pieces for all we care. Probably, I'd be more sympathetic towards the Americans in this case. The Americans are never, ever, not in it for a generation or more, they're going to have any interest in affairs in the Middle East or the Mediterranean, whereas Britain, will. And we have good relations, and we're courting good relations with the British. But seeing the Americans give the British a hiding, yeah, that'd be fine. I wouldn't mind seeing that at all. I think that'd benefit the Ottoman Empire, We're also looking at the United States as a possible. It's difficult us developing trade relations with the Americans because we kind of tend to sort of push the same kind of products. We're both tobacco exporters. America's much more developed. It's a much more efficient, sophisticated capitalist economy, of course. But if you look at like Constantinople, which starts, even though it's populous, it's a complete backwater. Constantinople is bigger than New York at this time. And even industrially, we've eclipsed New York. New York is a big industrial city, and it will grow into an even bigger one than what it is. But the development in Constantinople has been significant. Since 1850, we've gone from being an absolute backwater. Look at the size of Constantinople now. It's an industrial city. All these factories, this plant. And so we've done really, really well. Constantinople is one of the great industrial cities of the age. No doubt about that at all. It's bigger than most European cities. More factories than most European. Probably the only cities that are bigger than it are maybe Paris, London, for the most part. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling and doing sort of stream of consciousness speculating and whatnot. That's it for the most part, really. The colonial plan ongoing has raised the colonial penetration of Persian Gulf, Hejaz, Arabian Peninsula, enough that we can kind of move these areas into formal colonial status. We have successfully suppressed the revolt risk in Sana'a. We're going to be looking to do that again, really. And we are pushing a little bit into kind of the central area around Hadramawt and Makalla. In a weird way, if we don't do that, we're just sitting back and waiting for them, really. So we're just kind of, when Zayef Pasha is activated, the idea is to move them in, then pull back kind of thing, kind of take the fight to them, sort of get in their kitchen kind of thing, and that's what we're doing. But, yeah, we're not looking to occupy the central or eastern part of Yemen for the time being, I think, until we've significantly conducted a kind of repression campaign, which is going to take time. It's going to require us to sort of conduct these in areas where military units are stationed. So we're going to move this force back, Zayef Mustafa. We'll wait. We'll give him a turn. Actually, no, we'll do it now, I think. 17 days. No chance of force marching, not activated. Get it back to Aden, and then I think in Aden we'll look to conduct... Revolt risk there is 2.41. Once he's there, we'll keep him positioned there long term when we'll look to conduct a colonial move, which will be to prosecute a kind of military expedition against the population as a kind of sort of suppression, really, suppressing kind of revolt risk. It makes that these forces, because that's really how the Yemenis get their reinforcements. They get their reinforcements through revolts that are triggered because of the high background revolt risk of this region. Because they're a tough people, they don't want to take things lying down. But we have to suppress that long term, based on a long term operation to reduce that risk, and then move into the central part and then do the same there to kind of do it block by block, if you like. That forms the basis of turning Yemen into something similar to what we have in the Persian Gulf, which is a very pacified region, very quiet, very pliant, and an area that we can kind of comfortably exploit, really, and develop, raise the colonial penetration, get it to kind of full colony status. And that's what we want to do. It'd be worth doing that with Yemen, for all the reasons mentioned previously. Good kind of resources that we want to get access to. I think that's it for now. There's nothing else really to report on. We have got a Marine division, or a Marine brigade, I should say, that's ready. We're moving transports round now to Basra. They're going to be there shortly. I don't think they're there yet. They're kind of en route. 18 days. And with the Marine brigade, we are building a supply train, which is... yeah, it's done. So we're actually going to attach that. And we're going to begin moving the Marine Brigade to Basra. And this Marine Brigade, of course, is going to be the force that we're going to use to try and intervene. This may not come off, to be honest with you, but we're going to try and use it as a 48 days. Is there another way of doing this? 48 days is the fastest we're going to get. Yeah, this is basically going to be our Sumatra kind of intervention force. We're going to land in Asia and begin to try and develop a position there and try and build some infrastructure there that will facilitate facilitate really kind of developing our position into the central and sort of southeast part of the island. But yeah, it's going to take a bit of time for that to come off. We'll be looking at probably 1860. I think maybe kind of either later this year or early next year before we can get that marine force in place. And we'll see how kind of viable that is when it's there. It may be that it's just not going to be possible to supply it there. I don't know. That's it for now anyway. So that's late March 1859 report. A bit of a stream of consciousness, and apologies for the coughing. I'm not in best form at the moment. A bit worse for wear. But next report will be, I guess, kind of June, July, be kind of midsummer time, maybe even August if it's an especially uneventful time. But thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.